So, I've got a story about the one and only time I ever went camping to prove something to myself. And yeah, I know that already sounds stupid, because usually when people say they did something to prove a point, it means they were about to make a terrible decision. That was definitely the case here. This happened about 6 years ago, right after I quit a job that I absolutely hated, and told everybody I was finally going to reset my life. That was the word I kept using, reset, like I was some broken machine that just needed a weekend in the woods to come back as a better man. The truth was a lot less inspiring. I was angry, embarrassed, and trying very hard to make it look like I had chosen my situation. I'd quit without anything else lined up, burned through most of my savings, and then started acting like solitude was some noble choice. I'd always liked camping, but only in the casual, normal person way. This trip was different. This was my going off-grid phase. A friend had shown me a spot in northern Pennsylvania, not an official campground, just a rough clearing off an old logging road. It wasn't exactly secret, but it was far enough out that you couldn't just stumble onto it by accident. That appealed to me. So I loaded up my car, ignored the rain forecast, and headed out with food, beer, and a cheap tent I'd bought online. The first day was actually great. That's the messed up part. If it had been miserable right away, maybe I would have gone home. There was evidence that other people had camped there before, an old stone fire ring, and even a piece of blue tarp half buried. By sunset, I was in one of those moods where everything feels meaningful just because you're alone and slightly drunk. Around dark, I started hearing noises off beyond the trees. Not footsteps exactly, more like occasional snapping branches farther back. I even laughed at myself for feeling jumpy and said out loud, "Relax, man, nobody's out here." And that sentence bothers me now. The next morning, I woke up with a dry-mouthed camp hangover. I crawled out of the tent, already sweating. That's when I saw there was another vehicle parked about 50 yards away at the edge of the clearing. It was an old white passenger van. Dirt caked up the sides, one back window covered in plastic, and no license plate on the front. I had not heard it arrive. They'd tucked themselves off where the tree line almost bent inward, like they wanted some cover while still being close enough to watch. After maybe 30 seconds, the side door slid open and a woman stepped out holding a little metal kettle. She looked at me, smiled like we were neighbors passing on a sidewalk, and said, "Morning. Hope we didn't wake you." Her voice was calm, friendly, normal. Then she glanced back toward the van and called, "See? I told you somebody was already here." That was when the second person got out. A man, tall but kind of stooped, with a long weatherproof coat. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just looked straight at me with this strange expression. Not anger exactly, more like disappointment. The woman introduced herself as Laura. She said the man was her brother, Dean. She asked if I was up there alone. I said yeah, just taking a few days to myself. She smiled again and said, "Sometimes alone is good. Sometimes it isn't." Dean kept staring, not in an openly aggressive way. He was just fixed on me, like he was waiting for me to do something. Eventually, Laura told him to help unload. He turned away without a word and started moving things. But the stuff wasn't what I expected. No tent, for one thing. Instead, they pulled out folding chairs, plastic storage tubs, a lantern, and a rolled-up brown tarp. Then Dean brought out something that looked very much like a shovel. Not a little camp spade either. An actual full-size shovel. I know there are innocent reasons to bring a shovel, but it made my skin crawl. Laura caught me looking and laughed softly. She said, "Road gets muddy if the rain comes in." We've gotten stuck before. Totally reasonable explanation. But the feeling in my stomach stayed put. I spent most of that day trying not to pay attention to them and somehow paying attention to nothing else. Dean wandered in and out of the woods for long stretches. Laura sat in one of the folding chairs reading an old paperback. They barely spoke to each other. And every now and then I'd hear the van door open and close even when neither of them seemed to be near it. Around midday, I hiked down toward the creek maybe a quarter-mile away to wash up and get some space. Being away felt good. When I finally walked back, I noticed something immediately. My cooler lid was sitting open. At first I thought maybe I'd left it that way. But I knew I hadn't. I'm weird about bears and raccoons. I always latch it. Nothing obvious was missing, but things inside had been shifted around. Lavra was in her chair when I got back, and Dean was nowhere in sight. I asked if she'd seen an animal get into my cooler. She said, "Could have been." Things sniff around. The way she said it made me feel stupid. I checked the area then, hoping for paw prints. Instead, what I found in the dirt near the back corner of my tent was a boot print. Human. Fresh. I remember just crouching there staring at it longer than I should have, already knowing I was going to try and rationalize it. By then I was uncomfortable enough that I considered leaving. I really did, but leaving felt like losing. So I did what a lot of dumb men do when they're scared. I got defensive. I made noise. I moved around with purpose. I kept my folding knife in my pocket. And when Dean came back from the woods carrying branches, I stared right back at him. He stopped, looked at me, then looked at the knife clip in my pocket, and for the first time, he smiled. It was not a big smile. It barely moved his face, but it was enough to make something inside me tighten up. Lavra called out from her chair, "Dean, don't be rude." He kept smiling another second, then dropped the branches and went back to work. I remember opening a beer right then, even though I hadn't planned to start drinking that early. I wanted to take the edge off. It did not help. That night was when the trip really turned. They built a fire, but they didn't cook over it. Didn't even sit very close to it. Lavra just watched the flames while Dean kept making these short little walks to the van and back. I could hear the side door sliding open. A pause, then closing again, over and over. Finally, I heard Laura say quietly, "Not yet." Dean answered something too low for me to catch. Then she said, louder this time, "Because he'll hear you." And even though they weren't looking at me, I knew they were talking about me. I went into my tent earlier than I normally would have. I zipped it up, turned on my flashlight, and sat there pretending to read. The fire cracked. The van door slid. Someone walked across the clearing. Then it got quiet for a while, which somehow felt worse. Eventually I heard Lavra laugh once. Not a big laugh. Just a single little sound, like somebody remembering a joke privately. The next thing I remember is waking up freezing cold. The fire outside had burned down. Everything looked dim and blue through the tent fabric. I heard something scrape lightly along the outside wall of my tent. Not an animal. More like somebody dragging their fingernails across the nylon. I froze so hard I felt pain in my neck. The scraping moved slowly toward the door, then stopped. I waited. No footsteps. No breathing. I heard Laura's voice, calm as ever, saying, "You're making him nervous." Then Dean answered from right outside the tent. He should be. I heard their footsteps retreat. Fast. Then the van door slammed shut. The engine turned over, and for one moment I thought they were leaving. But they didn't drive away. They just moved the van. When the engine cut, it was much closer to my tent than before. The headlights flicked on, and my whole tent glowed white. That was when panic really hit me. I grabbed my keys, wallet, and phone. I also took that folding knife out. I tried calling 911. The call wouldn't connect. It just hung there trying. Outside, I heard low voices. Then footsteps. More than 2 sets this time. Not animals. Multiple people moving around in the clearing. Someone coughed right behind my tent, and all that denial just died instantly. I knew if I stayed inside, I was trapping myself. I took the zipper as slowly as I could, opened the back vent, and slid out into the wet grass on the far side. I belly crawled into the trees and kept going. From between two trunks, I could see my tent lit by lantern light. There were 3 people. The man in the cap walked over and yanked my tent door open. He shone a flashlight inside, then turned and shouted, "He's gone." Dean spun around toward the tree line, and for one awful second I was sure he was looking directly at me. I turned and moved deeper without caring how much noise I made. I heard somebody crash through brush behind me. They were spreading out. I was blundering downhill in the dark, guided by the sound of the creek. I slipped twice and at one point lost a shoe. Lavra called, "You don't need to do this." That line almost made me laugh later. What exactly did she think I was doing? I reached the creek. The water was black and fast. I followed it downstream because moving water might cover some of the noise. I heard Dean behind me on the bank yell, "We just want to talk." That was the moment any last bit of doubt vanished. I chose the creek. The shock of that water sucked the air right out of me. I half waded and half felt my way along. My keys were still in my pocket, but my car was back at the clearing. I wasn't getting to it before them. I knew that already. After what felt like forever, I saw a faint amber light through the trees ahead. It was so dim I thought I was hallucinating. But then I heard it too, the distant hum of a generator or maybe highway traffic. Civilization, or at least something man-made. I clawed my way up the bank toward it, hands numb, lungs burning, and came out beside a narrow gravel service road. There was an old utility shed and a padlocked gate. The light was mounted above the shed door. I never loved a light bulb more. My phone still had one weak bar there, maybe because the road was a little higher up. This time 911 connected. I was shaking so hard I could barely form words, but I told them there were multiple people in the woods trying to find me. The dispatcher kept telling me to stay on the line and give landmarks, which was hard because there basically weren't any. She finally got enough to send county deputies and told me not to go back toward the campsite. Believe me, I was not planning to. I stayed there by that gate for maybe 20 minutes, maybe 30. Time got weird. I kept expecting headlights to appear on the road, or for Dean to come walking out of the trees like he'd known exactly where I'd head. Once, I heard movement in the woods across the road and nearly passed out from adrenaline, but nothing came out. Then eventually I saw flashing lights in the distance and I honestly almost cried. 2 sheriff's deputies pulled up. They took one look at me, soaked, bleeding from the hands, one shoe missing, and got serious immediately. I told them everything in this rambling rush while they shined lights back toward the woods. One of them stayed with me. The other drove up the old road toward the turnoff. Then more units arrived. They asked what the people looked like. I kept waiting for somebody to think I was exaggerating, because honestly the story sounded insane even to me. But then the deputy who'd gone ahead radioed back, and I could hear the change in everybody's tone right away. The campsite was empty. My tent had been slashed open. My cooler was gone. The van was gone. And my car, this part still makes me angry, had all 4 tires punctured. Not slashed wildly. Punctured cleanly. Like somebody took their time. They didn't find Laura or Dean or the third man. What they did find was disturbed ground behind where the van had been parked. Fresh shovel marks. They dug there before sunrise and found nothing, but by then that almost made it worse. If nothing was buried there, what exactly had they been planning to use that shovel for? I gave a statement at the county station. They photographed my cuts and the bruises on my legs from falling through the creek. They kept asking whether I was absolutely sure there had been a third person, and I said yes, because I was. The deputy asked if I'd noticed any hunting gear, anything that could explain them being out there. I told him no. Just the van, the tubs, the tarp, the shovel. He wrote all of it down, nodding slowly in this way that didn't make me feel better. I stayed in a motel that morning. I didn't sleep at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that flashlight beam hitting my tent, while that guy in the cap shouted, "He's gone." That line got under my skin worse than almost anything else. Not "where is he?" Not "somebody was here, he's gone." Like they'd expected me to still be inside. The sheriff's office called a few days later. They hadn't found the van and there wasn't much else to update me on. I asked if this had happened before. The woman on the phone paused too long before saying there had been occasional issues. That answer was so careful it told me absolutely nothing, and somehow still scared me more. Then she thanked me for reporting it. A few weeks later, my friend called me sounding rattled. He'd mentioned what happened to an older guy he knew locally. That man apparently said there'd been stories for years about a white van showing up near isolated fishing spots and rough camps. Just weird encounters, supplies missing, campsites tampered with. One hunter found a tarp-covered pit in the woods. Small-town rumor stuff, the kind of thing you normally roll your eyes at until something happens to you. I don't know what Lara and Dean really were. I don't know who the third man was or if there were more people. They moved into that clearing knowing I was already there. They tested boundaries all day. They checked my stuff. They repositioned the van at night. They circled my tent with at least 3 people. They disabled my car. None of that is random. For a long time after, I kept feeling embarrassed about how scared I'd been, like I should have handled it better. But age has helped. The older I get, the more I realize that fear is sometimes the smartest thing your body does for you. Fear got me out of that tent. Pride was what kept me there too long in the first place. I still camp, but not alone anymore, and never anywhere unofficial. Not ever. The scariest thing I've ever run into out there was just a group of very ordinary-looking people with a van, a tarp, and a shovel. If I'd waited even another 30 seconds before crawling out of that tent, I don't think I'd be here telling you this.